Take that fake watch off before it embarrasses the entire room. The words didn't just land. They sliced clean through the low hum of polished conversations and clinking crystal, sharp enough to make a few heads turn before anyone dared to react. And in the center of it all stood Ethan Caldwell, a man who had built a billion-dollar empire before turning 40. His tailored charcoal suit catching the soft amber light like armor designed for rooms exactly like this. Rooms where power wasn't spoken but displayed, measured in silence, posture, and the quiet confidence of knowing you own more than anyone else present. And just a few feet away, standing still with a silver tray balanced in steady hands, was Naomi Brooks, a waitress most people hadn't noticed until that exact moment. Her posture straight, her expression calm, her presence almost invisible until it wasn't, and on her wrist, slightly worn, resting against her dark skin, sat the object that had just shifted the air in the room, a watch that didn't belong, not here, not among diamond-studded wrists and custom-engineered timepieces worth more than most people's yearly rent. It looked old, scratched at the edges, the leather straps softened by time, the face simple, almost modest, and that was exactly why Ethan noticed it, because in a room designed to impress, anything that didn't perform became a target. He tilted his head slightly, a faint smile pulling at the corner of his mouth, not loud, not aggressive, just enough to signal amusement, the kind that spread quickly among people who wanted to stay aligned with power. I mean it, he added, softer this time, almost conversational, but somehow worse. This place has standards. A couple of guests exchanged glances, one chuckled under his breath, another leaned back in his chair pretending not to watch, because everyone was watching now, everyone waiting for the smallest reaction, the smallest crack, but Naomi didn't move, not at first. Her fingers tightened just slightly around the edge of the tray, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, and no one ever looked that closely at someone like her, except tonight. Tonight was different. The chandelier above cast a soft glow that reflected off the glassware, off polished marble, and faintly, almost quietly, off the surface of her watch, catching the light in a way that didn't demand attention but held it. Anyway, Ethan followed that reflection for half a second longer than he intended, then let out a small breath through his nose, amused again, convinced, certain, because certainty was the currency he trusted most. You can't fake time, he said, lifting his own wrist slightly, revealing a watch that gleamed with engineered precision, a piece that whispered wealth without needing explanation. But you can definitely fake everything else. A few more laughs this time, softer, careful, controlled. The kind of laughter that asked permission before existing. And still Naomi said nothing, her eyes lowered just enough to remain professional, but not submissive, not broken, just still. And in that stillness, something shifted, something almost invisible, like the pause before a storm that doesn't announce itself. And then, slowly, deliberately, she moved, her hand leaving the tray for the first time, her fingers brushing lightly against the worn edge of the watch, not hiding it, not removing it, just acknowledging it, as if it meant something more than anyone in that room could see. And when she finally looked up, meeting Ethan's gaze without challenge, without fear, just clarity, the room seemed to hold its breath, because power had spoken first. But something else, something quieter, was about to answer. Naomi did not raise her voice. She did not rush. She did not apologize. She simply looked at him as if the moment he thought he controlled had already passed. And when she spoke, her tone was even, measured, the kind of calm that does not ask for permission. You are right, she said quietly, her fingers now resting fully on the watch. Some things look fake when you do not understand what you are looking at. The sentence did not fight him. It did not challenge him, but it shifted something. Deeper, something under the surface. The kind of shift that makes a room uncomfortable without anyone knowing exactly why. Ethan let out a short laugh, dismissive, controlled, practiced, the kind of laugh that had closed deals and ended arguments. That is convenient, he replied, leaning slightly forward in his chair, his eyes narrowing just enough to signal interest, not respect, never respect. Because from here, it looks like a cheap imitation trying to pass as something real. A few people at the table nodded subtly, not because they agreed, but because agreement was safer than silence. And still Naomi did not react the way they expected. No embarrassment, no retreat, just that same steady presence. As if the weight of the room had no effect on her balance. She gently set the tray down on the edge of the table. The soft sound of glass meeting polished wood echoing louder than it should have, drawing every eye closer, tighter, and then, slowly, she slipped the watch from her wrist, not with hesitation, but with care, like someone handling something that mattered, something that carried more than surface value. She placed it in front of Ethan, not pushed, not presented, just set down, and for a brief second, no one spoke, because the gesture itself felt like an answer before any words were needed. The leather strap curved naturally against the table, the face catching the overhead light again, and this time the reflection lingered, clearer, sharper, revealing details most had not noticed before. Faint engravings along the edge, markings too precise to be random, too intentional to be decorative. Ethan glanced at it, then back at her, unimpressed, or at least trying to be. "What am I supposed to see?" he asked, his voice quieter now, not because he had softened, but because something had begun to pull his attention in despite himself. Naomi's gaze did not leave his. "Not what it costs," she said. "What it means." The words landed differently, not sharp, not loud, but heavy, like something placed carefully into the center of the table where no one could ignore it. A man, seated 2 chairs down, leaned in slightly, his brow tightening, his eyes narrowing as he studied the watch more closely, recognition flickering just beneath the surface, subtle but undeniable. And then he shifted in his seat, just enough for Ethan to notice, just enough to disrupt the rhythm he had been controlling all night. Because in rooms like this, power depends on certainty, and certainty had just begun to crack, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, the most dangerous way it can. The man 2 seats down leaned closer, his chair shifting just an inch across the polished floor. But in a room like this, even an inch sounded like intention. His eyes fixed on the watch now, no longer casually observing but studying, tracing the edges, the markings, the subtle details that did not belong to anything ordinary. His lips parted slightly before he caught himself. Then he looked up at Ethan, not with amusement, not with agreement, but with something far more dangerous in a room built on certainty, hesitation. "Where did you get that?" he asked, but the question was not for Ethan. It was directed at Naomi, and that alone shifted the balance again, because for the first time that night, someone with status had redirected attention away from power and toward her. Ethan noticed it immediately, his jaw tightening just enough to register the change. Not anger, not yet, but awareness, the kind that comes when control begins to slip in ways that cannot be explained. Naomi did not rush to answer. She simply rested her hand lightly beside the watch, not claiming it, not protecting it, just present. "It was given to me," she said, her voice still calm, still even, but now the room leaned in without realizing it, because meaning had replaced spectacle, and meaning is harder to dismiss. The man nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing again as if confirming something he did not want to say out loud. Then he exhaled, a quiet breath that carried weight. "That is not a replica," he said, his tone careful, deliberate, every word chosen with precision. "That is a first series Caldwell chrono, limited run, under 50 ever made." The name landed like a ripple across the table, subtle at first, then expanding, because Caldwell was not just a name. It was Ethan's name, his brand, his origin, the foundation of everything he had built. Ethan's expression did not change immediately, but something behind his eyes shifted, a flicker of recognition colliding with disbelief. "That is not possible," he replied, too quickly, the confidence still there but thinner now, stretched. "Those were never released publicly." The man held his gaze, not challenging, just stating, "Exactly." And in that single word, the room tightened, because now this was no longer about a waitress wearing something out of place. This was about something that should not be there at all, something that connected directly to Ethan in a way he had not expected. Naomi's fingers brushed the edge of the watch again, a small movement, almost invisible, but deliberate. "Some things are not made to be sold," she said softly, and for the first time, Ethan looked at the watch not as an object to judge, but as something to understand. His hand moved slightly toward it, then stopped, hovering just above the surface, as if touching it would confirm something he was not ready to accept, because the past he had carefully controlled, The narrative he had built around success, around ownership, around value, was now sitting quietly in front of him, worn, unpolished, undeniable, and held by someone he had dismissed just moments ago. The air did not move, but everything in the room shifted, subtle and quiet. Like a foundation cracking beneath polished marble, Ethan's hand remained suspended above the watch for a second longer than it should have, then slowly lowered, not touching it yet, just hovering, studying, his eyes tracing the worn leather, the fine scratches, the engraving along the inner rim that only someone who knew exactly what to look for would recognize. And he did, because he had seen it before, not in a showroom, not in a catalog, but years ago, in a place far removed from glass towers and curated power, a small workshop that smelled like oil and metal, where time was not sold. It was built, his father's hands steady, precise, patient, a man who believed that what you made mattered more than what you showed. Ethan blinked once, as if clearing something unwelcome, something inconvenient, because memory had no place in a room like this, not when reputation was on the line. Where exactly did you say you got this? He asked again, but his voice had changed, quieter now, less certain, the edge still there but dulled. Naomi met his gaze without hesitation. I did not say where, she replied, and the distinction landed, because control over information is power, and for the first time that night, she was the one deciding what was revealed. The man beside Ethan leaned back slightly, watching, no longer neutral, now invested, because he understood what Ethan was beginning to realize. This was not about a watch. This was about origin, about history, about something that could not be bought back once misunderstood. Ethan finally reached forward and picked it up, carefully this time, not with the dismissive touch he might have used minutes earlier, but with intention, as if the weight of it had changed. He turned it slightly, angling it toward the light, and there it was, faint but unmistakable. A signature etched, so small it was almost hidden, not a brand, not a logo, but a name, his name, or more precisely, the name he had built everything on, the name he had refined, expanded, elevated into something global, something powerful. But this version, this engraving, it was older, raw, unpolished, from a time before success had smoothed the edges, before ambition had rewritten the story. His fingers tightened slightly around the watch, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for him to feel it, that tension between what he had become and what he had left behind. This piece was never released, he said again, but now it sounded less like a statement and more like a question directed inward. Naomi watched him, not with satisfaction, not with triumph, just clarity, the kind that does not need to prove anything. No, she said softly. It was not meant to be. And the words settled over the table like a truth that had been waiting. Because some things are not created for markets. They are created for meaning. And meaning does not disappear just because it is ignored. Ethan looked up at her again. Really looked this time. Not at her uniform, not at her role, but at her, searching for something that connected her to the object in his hand, to the past he was now being forced to remember. Then why do you have it? He asked. And this time, there was no mockery, no performance, just a question that carried weight, because the answer, whatever it was, would not just explain the watch, it would explain everything he had failed to see. Naomi did not answer immediately, and that pause stretched longer than anyone expected, not awkward, not uncertain, but deliberate, like she understood the weight of the question and refused to rush it. Her eyes lowered briefly to the watch still in Ethan's hand, then back up to him, steady, grounded. Because it was never yours to sell, she said, and the words did not rise, did not push. They simply settled into the room with a quiet force that no one could ignore. Ethan's expression tightened, not in anger, but in resistance, because the statement did not match the story he had built, the narrative he had repeated to investors, to the media, to himself, that everything he had came from vision, from risk, from control, not from something inherited. Not from something given meaning long before he understood its value. That is not how business works, he replied, his voice sharper now, reaching for familiar ground. Everything has a price. Naomi shook her head slightly, not dismissing him, but correcting something deeper. That is the difference, she said. You learned how to price things, but not how to value them. The distinction hung in the air, heavier than any accusation, because it did not attack him, it revealed him, the man at the table who had recognized the watch leaned forward again, his voice quieter now, almost respectful. "That engraving," he said, nodding toward the piece in Ethan's hand. "That is from before your company launched, before the patents, before the expansion." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "That is from when your father was still making them himself." The room shifted again, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough, because now this was no longer speculation, it was confirmation. And confirmation changes everything. Ethan's grip on the watch loosened slightly, his thumb brushing over the engraving again as if trying to feel something he had not felt in years, a memory, a truth, something that did not fit into quarterly reports or public statements. "My father stopped making these long before I took over," he said, but the certainty was gone, replaced by something quieter, something uncertain. Naomi nodded once. "He did," she said, "because he believed the moment people started buying them for status instead of purpose, they stopped being what he made them for." A silence followed, not empty, but full of everything that had been left unsaid for years, everything that had been replaced by success and polished into something easier to present. Ethan looked at her again, searching now, not for flaws, not for weakness, but for truth. "And you know this because," he began, but the sentence did not finish, because part of him already understood that whatever answer came next would not be simple. Naomi's expression did not change, but there was something in her eyes now, something deeper than before, not pride, not defiance, but connection. "Because I was there," she said quietly, and in that moment, the room did not just listen, it leaned in, because the story had just shifted from assumption to reality, and reality does not ask for permission to be believed. The words did not echo, they settled, heavy and quiet, as if the room itself understood that something irreversible had just been said. Ethan did not move at first, his hand still holding the watch, but no longer with control, now with something closer to uncertainty. "You were there," he repeated, slower this time, as if testing the weight of each word, not challenging it, but trying to place it somewhere within a past he had not revisited in years. Naomi gave a small nod, not dramatic, not performative, just confirmation. "My mother worked in your father's workshop," she said, her voice steady, grounded in memory rather than emotion. "She did not design them. She did not sign them. But she was there every day, shaping the details no one else noticed." Ethan's brow tightened slightly, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. Not of Naomi, not yet, but of the space she was describing. The workshop that existed long before boardrooms and investors, before branding turned craft into product. "There were only a few of those watches," Naomi continued, her gaze never leaving him. "And each one meant something different to him. He did not make them for profit. He made them for people he trusted." The man at the table who had recognized the watch shifted again, now fully engaged, because this was no longer about speculation or status. This was about origin, and origin carries authority that money cannot replicate. Ethan looked back down at the watch, his thumb tracing the engraving again. Slower this time, more deliberate, as if trying to reconnect with something he had distanced himself from. "He never mentioned any of this," Ethan said, but the sentence felt incomplete even as he spoke it, because part of him already knew that was not entirely true. It was not that his father had not mentioned it, it was that he had not listened. Naomi's expression softened, not in sympathy, but in understanding. "He did," she said quietly, "just not in the language you chose to hear." The distinction landed deeper than anything before it, because it was not about blame, it was about awareness, about the quiet ways people ignore what does not align with what they want to become. Ethan inhaled slowly, the first visible sign that something inside him had shifted beyond control, beyond performance. "So why do you have it?" he asked again, but now. The question was different, no longer defensive, no longer dismissive, but searching. Naomi glanced briefly at the watch, then back at him. "Because the day he stopped making them," she said, "he gave that one away." A pause followed, not for effect, but because the moment demanded it, because the next part was not just information, it was meaning. He said time should belong to the people who understand it, not the ones who try to own it. The sentence settled into the space between them. quiet but undeniable. And for the first time that night, Ethan did not respond immediately, because there was nothing he could say that would restore the version of control he had started with. The room remained still, but the energy had changed completely, no longer centered on him, no longer orbiting his presence. It had shifted, quietly but definitively, to the person he had overlooked and now could no longer ignore. No one reached for their drink. No one checked their phone. No one spoke, because the room had quietly shifted into something none of them had planned for, something that could not be managed with money or smoothed over with polite laughter. Ethan stood there with the watch still in his hand, but it no longer felt like something he owned. It felt like something he had misplaced a long time ago and was only now being forced to recognize. His posture, once relaxed and controlled, had changed in ways so subtle most would not notice, but enough for those who understood power to see it clearly. The certainty was gone, replaced by something far more human, something uncertain, something real. He gave it away. Ethan repeated, almost to himself, as if trying to reconstruct a memory he had never fully allowed himself to keep. Naomi watched him without interruption, without pressure, because this moment was no longer about proving anything. It was about allowing him to see what had always been there, just outside of his focus. He gave it to someone who showed up every day, she said softly. Someone who understood that time is not something you control, it is something you respect. The words did not accuse him, but they drew a line he could not ignore, a line between what he had built and what he had forgotten. Ethan exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carries more than air, the kind that releases something internal, something that had been held too tightly for too long. He looked down at the watch again, but this time, he was not evaluating it, not judging it. He was remembering the small workshop, the quiet discipline, the long hours that were never about scale or recognition, but about precision, about care, about doing something right even if no one ever noticed. And somewhere along the way, he had traded that for something louder, something faster, something easier to measure. I turned it into a product, he said, the realization forming as he spoke it, not as a defense, but as a confession, quiet and unguarded. Naomi did not respond immediately, because she did not need to. The truth had already landed, and in a room like this, truth is rare, and when it appears, it does not need reinforcement. The man who had first recognized the watch leaned back slightly, no longer analyzing, no longer questioning, just observing, because the power dynamic had already shifted, not through confrontation, but through clarity. Ethan finally placed the watch back on the table, gently this time, not as an object to dismiss, but as something to return, something to respect. His eyes lifted to meet Naomi's again, and for the first time that night, there was no trace of superiority, no performance, no distance, just acknowledgement. I was wrong, he said, and the words were simple, almost quiet, but they carried more weight than anything he had said before, because they were not strategic, they were not calculated, they were real. And in that moment, the room did not react with shock or applause. It reacted with silence, the kind of silence that comes when something meaningful has just happened, something that cannot be undone, something that changes the way everyone present will remember this night, not because of the wealth in the room, not because of the deals being discussed, but because of a single moment where power stepped aside and truth took its place. The silence did not break, it deepened, settling into the kind of stillness that does not feel empty but full of recognition, of quiet recalibration, of something unspoken passing between every person at that table. And for the first time that night, no one was looking at Ethan to lead, to respond, to define what came next. Because the center of gravity had already shifted, and it was not shifting back. Naomi reached forward and gently picked up the watch, her movements calm, unhurried, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened, but everything had. She turned the strap slightly in her fingers, not to show it off, not to reclaim power, but simply to return it to where it belonged, her wrist, her time, her meaning. Ethan watched that movement closely, not as a man evaluating an object, but as someone witnessing something he could not replicate, something that did not respond to wealth or status, something that existed entirely outside of the systems he had mastered. I built an empire around that name, he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else, the words no longer carrying pride, but reflection, but I never understood what it stood for. Naomi adjusted the watch on her wrist, the worn leather settling naturally against her skin, as if it had always been there, as if it had never belonged anywhere else. She met his gaze again, not to correct him, not to challenge him, but to complete the thought he had just begun. You understood how to grow it, she said, but not how it started. The distinction was not sharp, it was precise, and precision has a way of revealing more than force ever could. Ethan gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, but real, because in that moment, there was nothing left to defend, nothing left to prove. The man who had first recognized the watch glanced around the table, then back at Ethan, his expression no longer analytical, but respectful, because respect in rooms like this is not given to wealth alone. It is given to those who can face truth without hiding from it. A server passed quietly in the background, the soft clink of glass returning, the faint murmur of conversations slowly rebuilding. But the energy had changed, permanently, because everyone present had just witnessed something rare, something unscripted, a moment where status did not win, where perception failed, where something deeper quietly took its place. Ethan straightened slightly, not regaining his old posture, but finding a new one, less rigid, less constructed. Thank you, he said, and the words were simple, but this time they were not part of a transaction, not part of etiquette. They were genuine, directed not at service, but at truth. Naomi gave a small nod in return, not accepting praise, not elevating the moment, just acknowledging it, because for her, this was never about changing him. It was about revealing something he had forgotten. She picked up her tray again, steady, composed, and turned slightly to continue her work, moving back into the rhythm of the room without hesitation, without announcement, as if the moment that had just redefined everything did not require recognition to exist. And as she stepped away, the light caught the watch once more, not shining, not demanding attention, just present, quietly marking time. The one thing no one in that room could control, no matter how much they owned, no matter how much they believed they did. The night did not end with applause. It ended with something far quieter, something far more lasting. The kind of silence that lingers even after conversations resume, even after glasses are refilled and chairs shift back into place. Because once something real enters a room built on appearances, it does not leave when the moment passes. It stays, reshaping how everything else is seen. Ethan remained seated longer than he intended, his fingers resting lightly against the edge of the table, not reaching for his phone, not signaling for the next course, just still, watching as Naomi moved through the room again, not elevated, not spotlighted, just continuing, steady, composed, as if nothing had changed, and yet everything had, because now every movement she made carried a weight no one had recognized before, not because she demanded it, but because they had finally learned how to see it. The conversations around him slowly returned, but they felt different now, softer, less certain, as if each person present was recalibrating their own understanding of value, of status, of what truly mattered when the surface was stripped away. Ethan leaned back slightly, his gaze lifting toward the ceiling for a brief moment, the warm glow of the chandelier reflecting in his eyes, but not with the same confidence it held earlier. Now there was something else there, something reflective, something aware. I spent years building something bigger, he said quietly, not addressing anyone directly, but not entirely speaking to himself either, and somehow made it smaller at the same time. The words did not seek validation, they did not invite response, they simply existed, a realization spoken out loud. The man beside him gave a slight nod, not in agreement, but in recognition, because understanding does not always require explanation. Sometimes it only requires presence. Across the room, Naomi paused briefly at another table, offering a calm, professional smile as she set down a glass of water, her movements unchanged, her demeanor the same. But now, the people she served looked at her differently, not with curiosity, not with pity, but with a quiet respect that had not been there before, the kind that cannot be requested, only earned, and even then, often overlooked, until a moment like this forces it into view. Ethan stood slowly, not with urgency, not with command, but with intention, adjusting his jacket out of habit, Though the gesture felt less important now, less defining, he glanced once more toward Naomi, not to call her over, not to interrupt her, but simply to acknowledge her presence, the same way one acknowledges something meaningful without needing to own it. And then he turned toward the exit, not rushing, not lingering, just moving forward, carrying something unseen but undeniable with him, something that would not appear in headlines or reports, something that would not increase his valuation or expand his reach, but something far more difficult to measure: clarity. And as the doors closed softly behind him, the room returned to its rhythm, but not to its original state. Because once truth has been revealed, it does not disappear. It integrates, it reshapes, it stays, and somewhere in that quiet shift, in the reflection of a worn watch under soft light, a simple lesson remained, not spoken, not written, but understood. That power can command attention, but only truth earns respect, and time, no matter how it is measured, always reveals the difference.